it ends up sinking people much, much deeper. Emotionally, people are very focused on success. Did I succeed or did I not succeed? Which seems like a pretty reasonable place to be. But it's true in the world of pornography, which I won't go into extensively right now, that when people are in that mindset, very definitively of succeeding or of failing, it ends up sinking people much, much deeper, emotionally, but also practically in terms of their ability to handle it. But it's even true on the, I don't know, lighter level or whatever of the Shmiras Sinayim in the street and the like, which is what I propose is people taking an approach, which is much less about success and much more about being in the game.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank. Stark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a mentor in the workforce. This week, we are joined by returning guest, Dr. Dan Jacobson, to talk about the summer months and the challenges of Kedusha and tznius that we all face on a very regular basis. So, Dr. Dan, welcome back, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
So before we jump in, a quick personal reminder to leave a 5-star review and hit the subscribe button. It really makes me happy to see that the listeners are engaged and enjoying and leaving reviews, and it really helps us bring this content to new listeners and wider audiences. So thank you to everyone who's been doing that, and I encourage all listeners to go and hit subscribe, leave a review. It really, really helps us. So Dr. Dan, the summer is here. The weather is hot. The dress on the street creates a challenge for all of us. And so I'm wondering, to start off with some basics, can you give us an introduction of the fundamentals of the psychology, the mental health, and also the hashkafa around that with regards to those challenges that we're all facing?
Sure. Delighted to be back, and yasher koach again for bringing the world of psychology into the world of Torah and Torah living. Really important. So there's many, many things that can be said. I think on a very global level, anything that helps our mental health, help us be in a better psychological state, will end up helping us with things like Shmiras Einayim. That's what we're primarily talking about here, partially because we're just in a calmer state and we can do anything better, and partially because in all these realms that relate to that relate to Shmiras Einayim and also relate to pornography, which I think maybe we'll talk not so much about today, but it is related to psychological stuff. People tend to associate it just with taiva and drives, but a lot of the push to look and see often comes from inner states of feeling down, feeling anxious, feeling tense. So anything that helps mental health is helpful. But I think I would choose 2 points in mental health to focus on that are probably a little different than what would usually come up for people when they're thinking of this area, because I think that might be helpful. And the 2 areas are area of mindfulness and the related area of flow. When it comes to these areas, people's usual contact or starting point for working on these things is from Musar. And so we know in the world of Musar, many places in the Siyas Hasharim and elsewhere, it's about war and battle and fighting the good fight. And Milchama Panim V'Achor, Ramchal quotes early in the Siyas Hasharim, borrowing from Divrei Yamim, about life and trying to get better is a battle, and it's true. But Rav Yisrael Salanter also like to quote a different pasuk from Mishlei, which goes something like "Ki b'tachbulot ta'aseh lecha milchama." Pardon my mixed Ashkenazis and Spartus. When it comes, it's true in the world of actual battle and actual war that there are elements of it that are really just about force and power, and that's true also in Shmiras Einayim of just summoning that inner control. But there are parts of it that are also about what you're asking, essentially, of trying to think and understand and work on myself in a way that's more subtle, that can help. And it's not coincidental. Speaking of the war metaphor, that The former head of the Mossad, Yossi Cohen, has a book called Ki b'tachbulot ha'selacha milchama, because war is not just about power, it's about all the subtleties. So when mindfulness comes in, mindfulness is more in the popular public sphere in the last decade or two. I assume people have heard the term, and some people know about it, and some people practice it, but others just kind of heard it but don't know much about it. So it's something, it's related to meditation and something that's been imported from the Far East. And it's entered the world of psychology through different avenues, but among them, for people who know the therapy world, DBT and ACT, among others. And what I guess I'll try to explain it in a short story that goes like this. I sit on Monday mornings and do paperwork. While I'm doing paperwork, I put on some music in the background, generally different kinds of music on different days. One day I decided I was in the mood for classical music in the background. So I went on YouTube and just looked for classical music, and what came up was something like the Tokyo Philharmonic. So I turned it on, and then before I put it in the background, I saw the video itself, and I looked and saw the stage with the orchestra, which wasn't surprising. And then it didn't really show the audience, but it showed the front row of the audience. And I looked, and it was just kind of the back, black shapes. But I looked, and I'm looking and looking, and I was trying to figure out, I think it was soon after COVID. So, they had these sports events with, cutouts. So I was looking and trying to figure out, I was like, whoa, that's weird. They have cutouts sitting there in the front row, because it was just a bunch of shapes just sitting there. And after about 20, 30 seconds, I suddenly noticed that one of the cutouts, did this. And then I got confused. I looked again, and then, whatever, another 30 seconds later, I saw another cutout do that. What I realized was that I was watching Japanese people at a concert, and that there's something fundamentally different about Westerners and Easterners. And if you watch people from the back at an American concert, or probably an Israeli concert, or wherever else, you'll see people, kind of just fidgeting back and forth. You'll see someone scratch their head. You'll see someone sneeze, cough, clear their throat. And we are generally trained as Westerners, but also as Jews, to react to things. The yeshiva world, you're reacting all the time. Whatever comes up, you're analyzing it. But also more broadly in the Western world, we're noticing, trying to fix things. And the mindfulness approach talks about just noticing, learning that the fact that I, this very second, actually, have a slight itch on my beard right over here doesn't mean that I have to scratch it. I can just notice it. And so one of the things that happens with people in the realm of Shmiras Einayim is that people have an initial trigger, like they're walking in the street and their eye catches, a non-tznius dressed woman, walking by or whatever, wherever it is, and they notice it. And so there's a trigger, and there's maybe a little bit of arousal, taiva, that, pops up for a second. And so the operative thing, mibchinati, psychologically, is not the fact that you noticed that or had a trigger. That's a separate discussion, which I've had with Hasidish and other patients about, about not looking at all versus looking, another discussion. And so, what's operative is what happens next. And so in the world of mindfulness, the idea is learning and training oneself to be able to just notice that I had it, as opposed to beginning to fight it off, or beginning to think about, why I did that, or why, because that's really, with these kind of more subtle mental processes, that's really where the money is being able to let things just kind of pass through. And so I have a lot more I could say about mindfulness, but I don't want to overdo the mindfulness piece here.
So before we get to flow, we'll just analyze some of this wonderful information for a moment. So firstly, with regards to even like your opening, where you spoke about the connection between a person's broader mental health and their ability to navigate the challenges of Shmiras Einayim, I'm wondering if we could dive into that a little bit more. it's sometimes hard, at least personally, to track that connection. If you were to tell me, Yaakov, 100%, if you're not eating your vegetables and exercising enough, you will have a harder time with your Shmiras Hayinayim. It's a little hard to operate on that if it's less sort of clear and those connections and the causality there is less. So maybe just can you talk to what extent that is like from your perspective, a 100% ironclad scientific reality that a person should be, take care of themselves in many ways if they want to take their Shmiras Hayinayim seriously, or is it not so clear cut?
So I would differentiate between two things, and these are actually two different things that come up in my office when I'm working with people on Shmiras Hayinayim issues, meaning people who come in and this is really bothering them and trying to figure out what to do. One is a circumstance where I'm not looking for anything, but I'm in the street, I'm wherever I am, and something just kind of popped up in whatever way, and I got triggered. So regarding that whole side of things, that's where I'm coming at it from the angle of mindfulness and learning to be able to let that, along with a just shot of guilt or a shot of regret or anger or whatever it is, to be able to just kind of pass through. What you're raising, Yaakov, relates much more to the seeking out component, and that's true both with regard to watching pornography, but it's also true with regard to if I'm in the street. There's for some people it'll be I'm going out in the street in summertime and I'm not looking for anything, I'm just walking down the street, but things are in my face and I get triggered. But for other people, it's once I'm out in the street in the summertime, I know what I'm gonna see, and so their mind is already kind of scanning even before anything hits them. Their mind is kind of like, I know I shouldn't, I don't want to, but, and their mind's already kind of there, and that's where the general mental health comes in. I'm not suggesting that if a person eats their vegetables, their psychological vegetables, that they won't notice anything and they'll automatically just, everything will pass them by. But I'm talking about the other component, and that I for sure have seen and would sign off on as the case, which is that when a person is in a place where they're more down or more anxious or the like, they're much more vulnerable when they're a person who doesn't want to be doing this to nonetheless be going out actively, kind of, scanning the horizon and looking for things. And so, yes, with those things, taking care of myself and if I'm down, figuring out why, if I'm anxious, doing something that relaxes me. And, for the younger people in amongst the listeners, there, there's the people. I remember when I was young, at some point I asked, I was in my early 20s and I asked somebody, what a person in their 30s, like what they're doing in the summer. And he gave me a strange look, like, "What do you mean? What am I doing in the summer?" And he's like, "I'm working. But for people who are in the schedule of summer is vacation or Ben Azmanim is vacation or the like, that's where a lot of this stuff becomes particularly relevant because a lot of when there's suddenly a lot more time, find these things much more challenging, and they are both the mindfulness side of things, it's something that people work on for a long time to get good at, but even without working on it for a long time, it's good for you. And I encourage doing mindfulness work. But even without doing that, just the realization that what is good for me to be doing, not just psychologically, but also in terms of what's going to get me to a better place in terms of my life, is trying to let those things just kind of flow by. Anyway, with all these things can be bigger challenges in the vacation time.
And so you discussed the idea of mindfulness, and if I maybe just to summarize it, it's really the difference between needing to react to things versus needing to understand and notice and internalize things within your head, within your surroundings. So you can correct me if I'm wrong on that summary, but if I'm understanding correctly, maybe you can give us a few sort of practical tips that a listener can take away right now. Maybe specifically, I would ask: is it something that should be practiced on the next walk down the unsneezed street, or should we practice in a more sterile environment of just noticing things? What are some of the practical things that someone who's not currently about to drop everything and do long therapeutic sessions with Dr. Dan can walk away from this conversation a little bit smarter, a little bit better with some more tools?
So first of all, I'll just give a little mindfulness plug for those who are intrigued or interested. There's a expert named Jon Kabat-Zinn and a student of his, Dave Potter, has a website for free where you can do like an 8-part mindfulness series, and it's a great place for anybody who's interested. It's called Palouse Mindfulness. In any case, so first of all, in terms of your summer, I want to correct something there because it's important. Reacting includes actually doing something, to physically react, but also thinking about internalizing ideas, etc., or also beginner reacting. And the mindfulness counterweight to that is just noticing. Meaning I walked down the street and a woman dressed in whatever, I just noticed, and I got like a little rise like in my chest or wherever. I just felt a little something inside, and being aware that what usually happens next for me is I start to get anxious, or I start to get angry, or I physically, pull my head strongly to the side or whatever, and realizing that I can allow myself to just notice. I don't want to say too much more about it, but that's the core. In terms of the practical side of things for those who are not doing extended mindfulness work. So many years, probably decades ago, a Rav at Or Sameach, I think it was a Rav named David Gottlieb. I don't know if he's still there. I think he was a professor of philosophy at Johns Hopkins, and then anyway, interesting person. And at some point, I don't remember the context where I heard it, but at some point in a talk of his, he was talking about this issue. I don't know what he was talking about, like Yerushalmi Hasidim. He said they're not walking down the street going like this, in order not to see women. They have dancing eyes. That was his description. And so dancing eyes means I notice in order to dance, your eyes dance because you notice that you just landed on something and you'd like to go elsewhere. But you're not doing it from a place of getting emotional in the reaction. You're not doing it from a place of pulling away strongly. You're just kind of bouncing. And yes, that's something that a person can practice. Just trying to do that motion of when I notice that my eyes landed on a person I don't want to be staring at or thinking about or whatever, allowing myself to practice that, just kind of bouncing off to something else, which connects also to the flow that I mentioned before, the second psychological component, which is when a person is in, for people who know sports psychology, the concept of flow is big in sports psychology. How does a person get into a state where things are just happening? You have an athlete like Klay Thompson, for those who follow basketball, who is not like his old teammate Steph Curry, who is just almost always superb. He has times that he's okay and times that he's just, you cannot miss the basket because he's just in the zone. And he talks about being in the zone, in the flow. So you're looking to train yourself, and that's the dancing eyes, that's doing breathing, so I'm in a calm state. It can even be mental imaging practice. If I know I'm going somewhere, of just taking 30 seconds and just imagining myself walking there, and just kind of the image is just kind of bouncing past me. I'm not suggesting it's great to be bringing up lots of images of non-clad women in one's head, but to the extent one can just kind of see the crowd and just imagine people just kind of bouncing by as I'm going, those are all things that are that can be helpful.
So before we move forward, I guess one of the images that I've sort of had in my head about this and many other issues before is, you brought up sports. So if you think about like a field goal in the NFL, so there's the act of kicking a field goal is its own skill and its own person on the team, but the success of the field goal is due to that set of skills and execution, but also the field position that led up to taking that field goal. So it's a very big difference whether on the 50-yard line or on the 30-yard line. So I'm wondering if, broadly speaking, if you sort of accept that framing that we sort of have to approach this issue on these two levels, which is the maybe more in the moment ability to be calm, and then lots of other things that happen before that moment that will really affect the success rate, the challenge rate, all different factors. Does that resonate with you, and anything else on that sort of field position mindset that would be helpful in this discussion?
Yeah, I like the metaphor, and I think it is relevant. There's in the moment, and also that relates to what I was describing about kind of things that I'd practiced before, active practice, but also just general mental health, taking care of things. And those are all part of the story. Also, obviously, certain decisions about where I'm going are also part of the picture in terms of my field position. I would then say that there's a part of the metaphor that I would like to kind of lop off. And what I mean is that often in these realms, people are very focused on success. Did I succeed or did I not succeed? Which seems like a pretty reasonable place to be. But it's true in the world of pornography, which I won't go into extensively right now, that when people are in that mindset, very definitively of succeeding or of failing, it ends up sinking people much, much deeper emotionally, but also practically in terms of their ability to handle it. But it's even true on the, I don't know, lighter level or whatever of the Shmir Sinayim in the street and the like, which is what I propose is people taking an approach which is much less about success and much more about being in the game. And what I mean by that is, I'll say it like this. There's a fascinating comment of the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Avelus, how's that for random connection, where he says it's a mitzvah to be maspid, and he says it's also to lie about the niftar when you're maspid, but you should be maspid and mosif ktsat. So the Nosei Kelen discuss what does that mean, mosif ktsat? You shouldn't lie, but you should add a little bit. So there's different approaches, but what the Taz says essentially is okay, the person didn't give, $100 of tzedakah. He only gave $95 of tzedakah, but he would have given 100 if he had had another opportunity. He would have given the 100. But I think what the Taz is actually getting at is that when you give a hesped, it's not a behavioral resume of the person. You're trying to capture who the person actually was. So this guy was a $100 tzedakah guy. He wasn't a $95 tzedakah guy, even though that's what he did. So mipchanati, in this realm, what's important is who I am, and who I am is determined not by what I end up doing in certain realms that are very challenging, but about what I care about. I heard years ago from Rav Khan in YU who said, I forget who the quote was from, show me your heroes and I'll tell you who you are. Meaning, who you are is what you actually value, even if you're not able to quite be there. And so if you're a person who cares about this, and that's important. And that means that you're in the game. To go back to the sports metaphors, you're in the game. And that's a much better place to be with these things. I'm in the game, I'm trying, I'm working on it as my usual mentality about it, than to be regularly checking on myself, where am I holding, what yard line am I on? How did I do today? So that's so yes, the position on the field is a very apt metaphor, but we also need to be taking a different angle of just where I am, that I'm caring and I'm trying, as opposed to being fixated on the results, which ends up sinking me psychologically, but also practically in terms of being able to get where I want to get.
I really like that. And I even want to take it a step further away from sports. Obviously we understand there's a concept of a din v'cheshbon at the end of the day, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has that, and we believe in that. On the other hand, this is a conversation that we've had on the podcast with Simon Baum, and maybe we should do it again, because Simon and I were talking offline about this not long ago, which is that in the end of the day, we're in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu or with your spouse, right? It's never about winning. It's never about keeping score. And oy vavoy to anyone listening who has a scoreboard about taking the garbage out with their wife, that would be a really, really bad place to be in. So I think it's also, I would be willing to go a step farther away from sports. It's not even about being in the game. It's that the sports world analogy really does fall short when we're talking about this. So the next thing I want to ask you about, we sort of alluded to this before, but talk about summer vacations, and there's in Israel and everywhere in the world, it's hot, and there are a limited amount of places that a person can go with the family, and many of those places that are cooler include water, and water includes additional tznius challenges oftentimes. So any sort of practical tips or advice for someone who wants to, have a good time? Family time is important. Spending time with their kids is important. Sometimes there are separate beaches, separate activities, but that also limits the family effect of the said activity. So any practical tips from the Jacobson family or that you've seen around that could help people find wholesome, good, fun activities, but are also wholesome for the neshama as well?
Yeah, well, look, on the beachfront specifically, I mean, on the one hand, we live up in the mountains in Yerushalayim area, but so we're not at the beach all the time. But I and many of us love the beach. Practical front, what we did usually was, when the kids were young, and I'm not poskening anything, obviously, but people have to speak with their Rav and make their decisions. And when our kids were young, we went to, what they call, like in Israel, they're like family beaches, which are places. It's not a rule. But it's just kind of known that it's a place where families tend to come. And so the overall gestalt is that people are fairly dressed there. It's not, hundreds of teenagers with very little clothing on. So we did that when they were younger. And then once they got older, tended to move more to the mixed beaches unless we were able to find a place with a family beach kind of, that was really pretty empty or the like. Anyway, so those are judgment calls for people to make. I think it's important. Look, number one, I think it's important. You talked about spousal stuff before. I think that coordinating ahead of time is, and coming to reasonable agreement about what we're trying to do is really, really important. And that involves many things in terms type of activity, in terms of to what extent we're doing the way I do vacation of planning everything out and making the most of it, or the way people do vacation of just chilling and basically doing nothing. So I think having expectations in a reasonable place of reasonable agreement with kids also, but especially between spouses, is a critical piece of the puzzle. Beyond that, even though I did say in the last time I was on the podcast that I would be a tour guide if I weren't a psychologist, I don't know that I can give too much very specific guidance, but I think that if people are willing to take a step back and think a little bit creatively about what they are willing to do, there's a lot of different kinds of opportunities, different kinds of activities out there, and water, beaches is certainly far from the only activity wherever you are. But it takes creativity, and this is where it also takes being attuned to your kids. And a lot of what kids want is the quality time. It's not just about the activity. Sometimes people are so focused on, we got to do this, whether it's the beach or we have to do like this exciting, activity. And really what matters in the end, the studies about money, does money make people happy? So it doesn't when you buy things, it does more when you use it for experiences, and those experiences are about the quality time. And so that shouldn't be lost in the shuffle of being able to, on whatever vacation kind of thing you're doing, to have time that you're really doing family stuff. And that can be sitting around and playing a board game together that you never do. It can be going in the evening on a one-on-one walk with your teenager who you don't get to talk to so much. It could be all kinds of things that really contribute from.
Okay, good. Finally, I wanted to ask you, we find in the Gemara already that certain generations have different realities, different challenges, different qualities. And even in the Gemara, that is sometimes brought as a sort of matir to say sometimes there are certain spiritual realities that are very, very difficult for a certain generation. And therefore, in a certain sense, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously knows what our challenges are and know what we're struggling with, and we'll cut some slack. As I'm paraphrasing the Gemara in Perek Chilek, I'm sure many are familiar with about Menashe. So I'm wondering, do you think that is a helpful and fair thing to talk about tznius in this generation? Is that accurate? Is it not accurate? Maybe I've heard, if you were in an intense Muslim society where women wear burqas and whatever, maybe you still get, your yetzer would find a way to be attractive to the burqa and to the slit of eyes. There are a number of ways to take this. I'm happy to hear from you. I mean, the point of that is that right, it doesn't really matter what the dress code is. There will always be tznius challenges. That was that anecdote which I've heard from others. I don't know if you're familiar, but I guess broadly speaking, take the jumble of thoughts that I had and maybe just happy to hear from you. Should we be thinking of this as a generational challenge where we should cut ourselves some slack, or is that not a helpful lens of thinking about this?
Overall, I think the answer is yes. I think, look, the Mrs. Sharm also quotes Gemara in Bava Basra about Rov Begezel, Mute Barayas, everybody Lashon Hara, Avak Lashon Hara. Like, what's the point of that? The point of that is, like you're saying, which is there's something important and helpful for us to be aware of just how challenging certain things are, because We don't approach every single potential avera with the same mindset. Partially in terms of realizing maybe that we need to work more on something, but also in terms of cutting ourselves a certain slack. I heard at the conference once that the Satmarav said in the 60s, I don't know when, that my Hasidim see more in one trip to Manhattan than their Zeta saw in a lifetime in the shtetl. And that was certainly, we can say that our Hasidim see more in one sitting at a computer than his Hasidim saw in a lifetime driving to Manhattan. So, it's no question it is. And I have, I guess, several thoughts about that. Look, there's a booklet on one that preceded my booklet, a booklet called something like The Battle of Our Generation, a yellow booklet that you see in some yeshivas that go around. And I think at some level, it's certainly true that these issues of tznius are the battle of our generation in a way that they weren't for previous generations. I think the framing of that, we have to be a little careful at several levels. Number one, over-focus at times on something can balloon it into something more than it needs to be. It's not true for every single male over 13 that this is the battle of their life. It's true that it's a big challenge and it's et cetera. The other part of it is sometimes we can get lost a little bit with which when we're talking about this area as just the battle, we forget there's a broader thing that we're talking about here that's called sexuality, which is our general experience and all that entails. And that's something which is a blessed part of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has endowed us with. And talking about this area over and over again, just if we overdo it as this is the battle, doesn't prepare us for, number one, just feeling good with ourselves. This connects a little bit back to mindfulness at the beginning, but also for marriage and relationship. Coming in where we're carrying primarily, battle, doesn't prepare us properly for being able to utilize this in the area of relationship. So yes, we need to cut ourselves slack, and yes, it is a battle and a huge challenge in our generation more than others. And at the same time, we need to be able to hold that and frame it within a place where each person needs to know for themselves how much it is a battle, how much it's not so much of a battle, and also each of us needs to also have that piece. That's one piece of the general gestalt of this arena that relates to our relationships and how important and beautiful this is.
Amazing. Dr. Dan, thank you so much. You alluded to this at the end, and I should have said at the beginning, and maybe I'll add something afterwards, but you do have a very important choveret, a book of a short book with some very important ideas on this topic. We posted it last time we did an episode together, and we got some very good feedback about that part of the conversation and this particular collection of Torah ideas. So we'll post that here as well, and I think everyone should really take a look at it and find something there. I think everyone will find something there that they will find valuable and useful. So we'll add a link to the show notes. So Dr. Dan, thank you for this conversation, for being such a good teacher and educator and guide on these topics for our audience. And I look forward to staying in touch. Okay, you too. Thank you so much.